Born on a blistering hot day in 1930, Ross Perot was raised in Texarkana by a hard-working Texas cotton broker and his loving wife. It was the Depression, and the family lived in modest circumstances, but Ross and his sister Betty say they were born rich.
We had wonderful parents. My mother was an angel, and my dad was my best friend. I was his best friend, and the fact that we didn't have any money was not nearly as significant as the fact that we had one another.
Although she struggled to make ends meet for her own family, Ross's mother always had a meal and a kind word for the homeless strangers who would wander from the nearby railroad tracks to their door.
We didn't really have food to give to other people, but my mother always gave them food. And she told me the reason she did it again and again is she'd say, "Son, these are people just like us, but they are down on their luck, and we must help them." We were taught, "There but by the grace of God go I." I was taught that at home.
Even in the hardest of times, Ross's father always made certain his family was taken care of, building a business in the depths of the Depression by treating the farmers he dealt with honestly and fairly. His son says he learned everything he needed to know about business at his father's knee.
He was in the cotton brokerage business. He would buy cotton from the farmers and sell it to the mills. And he always paid the farmers a fair price. His office was my Harvard Business School. I could sit in his office as a little boy and watch him do business all day long. It was a little wooden building. I helped him build it. I have a picture in my office I will always keep and treasure. It shows his general ledger hanging from a nail on the wall. And only in America could that man's son have the opportunities in just one generation to build a network of computer centers all over the world, processing financial information by satellite.
Father and son were best of friends, the busy cotton trader taking time out to ride with his son after school.
Typically would pick me up every afternoon after school, and he and I would ride until dark. Then on Fridays, he would take me to the horse, mule, and cattle auctions at Owen Brothers Barn. And as a little boy, he started letting me buy and sell bridles first, but I couldn't take one home. I could buy it for $4 and sell it for $4.50 or sell it for $5, but he was training me to make a profit.
Ross learned to break horses by age 7, taking his fair share of lumps and broken noses, but learning an important lesson. Why get bucked off if there's a better way to do it? Once a month, Ross's family would go to the movies, and it was there that Ross saw a film on Thomas Edison, which would fire his imagination.
And after seeing the Edison movie, I was intrigued with coming up with ways that would make it easier for me to feed and water the horses, because that was my job. The only problem was I never had the money to implement them. And today, all of them are in my barn at my house. So I finally got to do it years later.
His legendary career as a salesman started early, going door to door, selling everything from garden seeds to Saturday Evening Post magazines. And he delivered newspapers on horseback.
Had to, because the streets were sand. You couldn't ride a bicycle with a heavy load of papers. So I would get up about 4 in the morning, saddle my horse, and go deliver the papers. Absolutely safe. Started a paper out in the black community of Texarkana. Everybody said it couldn't be done. While I was throwing that paper out, my dad had to have a kidney operation, which was a huge, complex operation at that time. We had to go to Shreveport, Louisiana to have it done. I couldn't get anyone to throw the papers while I was gone. So I went from door to door and explained to my customers that I'd be gone for several days with my dad and that I hoped they would take the papers when I came back. Almost to a family, they said, "Save the papers and bring them to us when you come back." And I replied, "You don't want old papers." They said, "That's not the point, son. You need the money if your dad's having an operation." Now here are people who with luck were making $9 a week. And one of the reasons they took those papers, they would use them to paper the walls to keep the wind out of the house. They would use them for insulation under their mattresses. And for them to have that kind, warm spirit certainly left a lasting impression on me.
He dug fence posts and strung barbed wire, but no matter what, he had to be at school on time and in church on Sunday.
Education was very important, but going to church was even more important. And unless you were dead, you went to Sunday school and church. No ifs, ands, and buts. And my grandparents were always there. My parents were there, and Betty and I were there.
After working all summer, Ross would take 2 weeks off to hitchhike across Texas and learn as much as he could, kept safe by the kindness of strangers he would meet, and dreaming of his future from the back of pickup trucks. Ross dreamed of going to the Naval Academy, but had to wait for an appointment, so he attended Texarkana Junior College, where his determination was tested as student body president. Ross stood up for what the students he represented wanted, to move the campus to a location where the school could grow. The skeptical school board was finally persuaded, and Texarkana College grew from 200 to 3,800 students and thrives today as a 4-year institution. But Ross's sights were still set on Annapolis.
I finished my first year of college, we didn't get an appointment. Finished my second year of college and was getting ready just to keep on going to college, and suddenly one day we got a Western Union telegram announcing that I had received an appointment to the Naval Academy.
Ross thrived in the competitive environment at Annapolis. He ranked in the top 1% of his class in leadership. An evaluation process conducted by his classmates, upperclassmen, military officers, and academic instructors. Elected president of his class both his junior and senior years, and chairman of the honor committee, he was asked to rewrite the honor code, served as a battalion commander, and received an award for outstanding leadership upon graduation. He was given the honor of escorting President Dwight D. Eisenhower on a tour of the Naval Academy.
It was just like visiting with a nice friend, and my most vivid memory of the whole experience in retrospect is there were no Secret Service men. He just, President Eisenhower, Mrs. Eisenhower, and I wandering around the Naval Academy.
As a midshipman, Ross got his first glimpse of Wall Street from the deck of a Navy ship after spending 14 hours cleaning the boiler. Little did he know that someday he would have a company listed on the New York Stock Exchange. In his senior year, Ross met Margot Birmingham.
I had a very good friend at college who wanted me to meet him, and she was going out with a friend of his, and she kept telling me that she was sure I'd like him and all those things, so she arranged a blind date.
We had a blind date in the fall of 1952, and I met Margot on that weekend and was very, very much impressed with her. And she was such a lovely person, and just, I guess they say every boy's looking for someone like his mother, but she had all those wonderful qualities that my mother had, and the most unique person I had met. So I fell in love immediately.
Margot was from Greensburg, Pennsylvania, and she was attending nearby Goucher College.
Margot went back to Goucher. It's located outside Baltimore. And at dinner on Sunday night, the girls said, well, Margot, how was the Texan? And they love to tell this story. Margot hates it. She hesitated for several seconds and said, well, he's really clean looking. And that was Margot's first reaction.
They dated for 4 years and married in 1956, a marriage which remained strong 40 years later.
He was mature. He always knew what he was about. He was strong in his beliefs and self-confident, and I really appreciated that about him.
Reporting for duty aboard the USS Sigourney at 2 a.m. on his 23rd birthday, the young ensign began one of the great adventures of his life. 9 months aboard a destroyer, crossing 17 seas and visiting 22 countries. The young man who hitchhiked across Texas couldn't believe he was lucky enough to have an opportunity to see the world. He was the junior officer aboard ship at the end of the Korean War.
Junior officer aboard ship gets all the odd assignments. That's how I got to be chaplain, not because of any particular training. So I had to hold service on the fantail, that's the back of the ship, every Sunday. And to my amazement, we had an overflow crowd. And after several weeks of this, I thought that I might be the next Billy Graham. Then we got to Midway Island. I'll never forget it. And the truce was signed. And the next Sunday, service attendants dropped.
It was aboard his next ship, the aircraft carrier Leyte, where Ross got a lucky break. While working on the bridge as assistant navigator, he was introduced to an executive from IBM who offered him a job when he left the Navy.
Nobody ever offered me a job. I always had to look for work. I'm now 27 years old. You're the first person in my life who ever offered me a job. You bet I would like to have an interview with IBM, and I don't even know what you do. Now, that was the bad part. He just broke out laughing. He says, "You don't know what IBM does?" And I said, "No, sir." He said, "Well, one of the reasons we're interested in you, Ross, is the captain tells me you really know a lot about the fire control computers on the ship that control the weapons." And I said, "Well, yes, sir, that's something I've had a lot of experience with." And he said, "Well, we're in the computer business."
The rest is history. Ross and Margot packed everything they owned into the back of their car and headed for Texas.
Everything we owned was in the back of a 1952 Plymouth. Every worldly possession. We were as happy then as we are now. My point being that tangible things don't bring happiness. Happiness is a state of mind.
Ross entered the IBM training program with great enthusiasm, ranking first in his sales training class at the computer giant, and began a meteoric rise to the top of the sales force at IBM.
I was selling computers at a time when everybody wanted a computer. It was sort of like selling umbrellas when it's raining. You could make your quota and not work too hard. But I had always worked hard. I was trained to work hard from childhood, and I enjoyed working hard. So I worked hard all day, and that was the reason that I had the very successful sales record.
In 1958, the young couple started their family with the arrival of Ross Jr. They worked hard and saved their money. Margot taught school, and after several years, they bought their first house. The leadership principles instilled in Ross as a naval officer were now reinforced at IBM, and once again he thrived in the competitive environment. He sold at such a high rate, the company cut his commission. The young salesman was eager for a new challenge. He had become a problem solver, and he was ready to take on something bigger. As his young family grew, he developed a new idea in the computer business: to sell a fully operational computer hardware and software system.
And so I didn't quite know what to do. I tried to get IBM to do it. And to IBM's credit, they heard me out to the top. And I was sitting in the barbershop one day reading a Reader's Digest and read a quote from Perot: "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." And I said to myself, that's it, I've got to try it.
He set out on his own to make his idea a success. He borrowed $1,000 from Margot, named his mother, his sister, and Margot as corporate directors, and EDS was born. The company's only employee, Ross Perot. Calling on the sales and leadership skills instilled in him since a boy, Ross hit the road to try and sell his idea to corporate America. It was not an overnight success, but Ross stuck with it.
You have to go back to childhood. I started to work when I was 6. Every job I had ever had, I wasn't paid anything until I sold something. My first job was selling Christmas cards. And I knocked on a lot of doors for every time I'd sell a Christmas card. I was used to it. Then I sold Saturday Evening Post. Then I sold garden seeds.
Finally, on his 78th sales call, Ross closed his first contract and the company took off, solving complex problems for the nation's largest corporations. To transform his dream into what would become a company of 95,000 employees and $12.4 billion in revenue, Ross built a team.
I said, I don't care who you are, I don't care where you come from, I don't care where you went to school, I don't care if you went to school, I don't care what race, religion, or color you are. And I was interrupted by a recruiter who said, do you care about anything? And I said, yes. I'm dead interested in what these folks that you're looking for can do, and I'm interested in what they've done lately. In other words, what are their skills, and what have they done lately, and what are their characteristics? And we want that honest, tough, smart, self-reliant characteristic.
As EDS grew, Ross Perot gained world attention. In 1969, he was asked to launch a major project to embarrass the North Vietnamese into changing the harsh treatment they were giving American prisoners of war.
President Nixon asked me to do it. The thing that triggered this is they got a study that indicated they thought that 50% of the men would die from brutality and neglect before the end of the war, and they thought it would take 3 years to Vietnamize the whole process and withdraw. So our challenge was to try to embarrass the North Vietnamese into changing the treatment. They asked me if I would do it. I said, certainly I will do it. I had friends who were prisoners.
Ross flew to Laos to meet with the North Vietnamese and Russian ambassadors, bringing with him a plane load of food, medical supplies, and Christmas presents for the POWs from their families.
And the Vietnamese ambassador rejected accepting all of these things, which was better than having them delivered because that angered the world. So we brought the goods home, and the net of it is, though, they changed the treatment of the prisoners dramatically while we were still on the ground in Laos.
After the war, Ross learned from the POWs that his 3-year effort of pressure on the North Vietnamese significantly improved the treatment the Americans received. Ross purposely avoided the homecoming when the prisoners were released in 1973.
I didn't want to be there because I wanted them to see their families. And there was one particular family where the mother had come to me with a little baby in her arms and saying, this little baby doesn't know whether his father is dead or alive. We beat the dickens out of those guys for 90 days over Jerry Singleton, and they admitted they had him. Then they had to keep him alive. And everybody wanted me to see this little boy, who is now, say 5 or 6 years old, see his dad when he got off the airplane. And I said, no, I don't want to be there because his dad's not interested in seeing me, he's interested in seeing the family. But I asked the press to get me a picture of him, and one of my most treasured possessions is this little boy. Boy, his eyes are lighted up, he's pointing at his dad. And another treasured possession is a photograph of the two of them together that they sent me shortly after he came home, saying, thanks for making this picture possible.
On their return, Ross Perot arranged for the POWs to meet in San Francisco with troops who risked their lives on a rescue mission at Son Tay prison camp outside Hanoi. And he pledged himself to a statesman's goal.
First commit the nation, then commit the troops, and then after the war you honor your heroes. Abraham Lincoln said, any nation that does not honor its heroes will not long endure.
The war began a lifelong bond between the soldiers who were mistreated by their own country and the man who refused to allow it. Among them, a South Vietnamese fighter pilot imprisoned alongside the Americans, Nguyen Dat.
Sometimes it was so easy to kill, but it was very, very difficult to save a life. And not only Ross saved my life, but he saved also the life of 17 other members of my family. And we all are very grateful for what he did for us.
Ross exhibited his depth of commitment when revolutionaries in Iran ousted the Shah and took 2 EDS employees hostage. They were being held to keep the Iranian government's computers running during the revolution.
I knew them, I knew their wives, I knew their children. They were like members of my family. And suddenly they were put in a terrible situation where literally their lives were at risk at all times.
Ross refused to sit on the sidelines and wait while his friends sat in an Iranian jail. The U.S. government could not help, so he formed a rescue team made up of EDS employees who had combat experience in Vietnam. He went to visit his mother, who was hospitalized with cancer, to tell her what he was going to do.
When I finished explaining, she said, son, these are your men. You sent them over there. They didn't do anything wrong. It's your responsibility to get them out.
The rescue team was led by a war hero, Colonel Arthur Simons, and Ross insisted on going himself. He was not about to ask others to risk their lives without risking his own.
I went into Iran, went into the prison, visited with Paul and Bill in prison, briefed them on the fact that we had the rescue team in place.
If he had been recognized, Ross could have been imprisoned or killed, but he got out of Iran and went to Turkey to wait for the rescue team.
Colonel Simons and his team did a brilliant job, brought them out 540 miles overland in Iran, then into Turkey. And then we picked them up in eastern Turkey and came on home.
After the team was safely home, author Ken Follett chronicled their real-life triumph in the bestseller On Wings of Eagles. In 1986, Ross sold the company he created to General Motors. 2 years later, he started a new company, Perot Systems. In its first 7 years, Perot Systems grew to 25 times the size of EDS when it was 7 years old. Ross Perot has never sought public recognition, yet he has received more than 45 public service and business awards. Ross was the first recipient of the Raoul Wallenberg Award, given for devotion and strength of commitment. In 1986, he became the third recipient of the Winston Churchill Award, the first businessman to receive the honor later given to President Reagan. He has been asked to take on the toughest problems, chairing task forces on everything from drug abuse to education. He served on the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, a position which requires the nation's highest security clearance, and was appointed by the President as chairman of the U.S. Naval Academy Board of Visitors. But Ross is proudest of his family. He and Margot have 5 children, 1 son and 4 daughters, and 10 grandchildren. He defines his success through them.
After EDS was successful, I was asked, how did it feel to be successful? And I responded that I will not feel successful until my children are grown, until they're good citizens with a deep concern for other people, and they do something about that concern. Then I will feel successful. Well, I feel like a really big success now because they're all grown, they're all too good to be true. Margot was an incredible mother, and they are just as good as gold. I have nothing but happy memories of their childhood. I certainly miss having them here all the time, but they are as close to perfect as human beings could be, and we are so proud of them. And that I consider our greatest success, and Margot deserves most of the credit.
Ross Perot's commitment to others extends far beyond his friends and family. He believes in helping others and living by example.
I was taught to do that from childhood. I followed my parents' example. I've seen my father do it 1,000 times with money he didn't have, my mother do it again and again and again with things she didn't have to share. And I was just taught that from infancy, literally, to do that.
When his first company, EDS, went public, Ross received $5 million and did something unusual. He gave half of it away within 60 days.
The Dallas Public Schools approached me about funding a special school for very poor children where the children would start when they were 2 or 3 years old, and they would go to school year-round, they would have breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the school, get all kinds of special attention. This seemed like a great idea to me, and I did it.
Ross contributed to the Dallas Symphony Hall and the Dallas Museum. He supports the Boy Scouts. He was himself an Eagle Scout. And he and his wife Margot are totally focused on helping people in need. Time and time again, Ross has come to the aid of people he has never met, like Sergeant David Campbell.
I was in such pain on my left side that I couldn't really move as much as I tried to. And my left arm was not laying beside me where it should have been.
Sergeant David Campbell was severely injured in a Scud missile attack during Operation Desert Storm, and Ross arranged emergency medical care at the request of Campbell's wife, Gail.
When I think of Mr. Perot, I get very emotional. I have a lot of feelings for this man, and I just know in my heart that my husband is alive today because of him.
In 1992, Ross Perot was asked to take on an unprecedented challenge. And like so many other times in his life, he stepped up. Ross took on the challenge of campaigning for the presidency as an independent candidate to try and take back control of the country from the special interests and return it to the people. He focused the campaign agenda on government debt and the rising federal deficit. He was propelled into the '92 presidential debates, and he won those debates.
I was speaking from the heart. I was saying what I believed. I had not been briefed. I had not been rehearsed for 3 days. It was fascinating to see it up close. The other two candidates spent the whole afternoon on stage checking their suits, checking their ties, checking their shirts.
In an extraordinary show of support, Ross received more than 19 million votes in the '92 election. And polls after the election indicated that 40% of the voters would have voted for Ross Perot.
Then they asked the very rational question, then why didn't you vote your conscience? And they said, we were told again and again and again, don't waste your vote on Perot. And we didn't want to waste our vote. We wanted to vote for a winner.
But that was just the start. Over the next 4 years, Ross would continue to challenge Washington on the issues that are important to the people.
I think persistence has been a hallmark of my life and the things that I believed in.
In 1996, Ross accepted the nomination of the Reform Party as their candidate for president. He stands committed to ending control of Washington by special interest, and to hold national referendums on major changes to programs so the people can take control of their own future.
I wanted to create an institution dedicated to these principles, because we have to do it, and the sooner we start, the less painful it will be for people.
Ross Perot has always believed in the power of the people, and he embodies the integrity, commitment, and leadership ability the people want in their president.
You have the responsibility for people's lives in combat, and that you do not ever stray from the highest moral and ethical standards in how you conduct your affairs, and that you never forget that every time you make a decision, you are spending the money of electricians, factory workers, farmers, people who work second and third shift, and that money should be spent very, very carefully and always in the best interest of the country.
The man from East Texas, who came so far and who has accomplished so much, has no illusion of what it means to be President of the United States.
Now, I wouldn't go to Washington just to hear the bands play Hail to the Chief and all that stuff that goes with power. I'm going to Washington as a servant of the people to face and solve these problems, to make sure that some person who's a nobody from nowhere like I was is only limited by his or her dreams and their willingness to make those dreams come true. I've been very, very lucky. I couldn't have had more wonderful parents, couldn't have had a greater childhood. Was lucky to get into the Naval Academy, was lucky to meet Margot on a blind date. I want the 21st century to be the greatest in our country's history for our children and grandchildren.
He has forged the lessons of childhood during a lifetime of experience and success, and stands ready to take on the biggest challenge of his life, solving our country's problems and returning the power of the greatest nation in history to its rightful owners, the people. Ross Perot has lived the American dream. It is his single goal to rebuild that dream so that others may follow. If you would like to support Ross Perot and the Reform Party, call 1-800-96-PARTY now. Those who contribute $50 or more will receive a complimentary copy of Ross Perot, My Life and the Principles for Success, a practical guide of how to build a successful business. Call 1-800-96-PARTY or send contributions to Perot 96, P.O. Box 96, Dallas, Texas 75221. Remember, the Reform Party has received just 1/4 of the funds the other two parties have to campaign. We will not accept contributions from special interests or PACs. We will only accept the support of hard-working Americans who want our government to answer to the owners of this country, the people. Let's take back control of our country. Call 1-800-96-PARTY now.